It's my distinct pleasure to introduce the next session titled First Generation Students and Campus Success, Insights from the Pathways to Thrive ePortfolio Cohort. Rebecca Thomas and Christa Matlack from Bucknell University um, will share that presentation with us. So I'll pass on the mic to them. Welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Pablo. And that was an amazing keynote again this morning. Um, thank you everybody for joining us. Actually, Christa's got the beginning of this presentation, so do you want to take over and do the introduction?
I mean, sure. So hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present on our ePortfolio cohort. So I'm Christa Matlack. I am a 2011 Bucknell grad, and I now work at the Career Center. And I focus primarily on STEM industries, but I'm also the point person for ePortfolios in our office. But I will let you introduce yourself, Rebecca.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Thomas. I am the faculty director for Bucknell's Pathways ePortfolio program. Bucknell has had a formal ePortfolio program for 5 years now, and I've been working as the inaugural director for the past 4 years. And in addition to that, I am also an associate teaching professor in the electrical and computer engineering department.
What we're going to talk to you today about is the Bucknell's Thrive program. And so at Bucknell, one of our former associate provosts, Joe Tranquillo, helped spearhead this program with a goal of fulfilling the promise of the university's most recent strategic plan, and that is to offer students a transformative experience that prepares them to thrive not only here on campus, but also throughout their lives. So the Thrive program is really organized around 4 pillars, 1 being meeting basic needs, 2, a sense of belonging, 3, access and use of resources, and 4, holistic growth. And this framework has generated well over 300 university-wide initiatives that were designed to enhance the student experience in 1 or more of these pillars. And the cool thing about it is a lot of the work is interdisciplinary. So it's lots of different groups coming together across campus to help improve the student experience. And you do earn some grant funding to help with the initiative. So Rebecca and I, in particular, collaborated with the leader of our Gen First program. Her name is Jocelyn Scott. We developed a proposal for an ePortfolio cohort that was supposed to be comprised of just first generation students, with the ultimate goal of having these students reflect more deeply upon their unique Bucknell experiences in hopes of really learning, what are some gaps on campus and areas of improvement that we can make to our campus resources. And once our proposal was approved, we really strategically designed all of the prompts to address those 4 pillars within the Thrive framework. And we actually utilized our grant funds, because it's just an ePortfolio cohort, to incentivize the students with a small stipend once they completed the entire ePortfolio. Our cohort, the demographics are on the screen there graphically for you. We had, I think, 15 or 16 students sign up initially, but only 7 completed the entire program. All of the students were female or female presenting. We had representation from all 3 colleges at our university. However, all but 1 of the students fell into a STEM major. 5 of the 7 students identified as white or Caucasian, 2 identified as Hispanic. And our cohort also included a community college scholar, so a transfer student that came into Bucknell after completing community college. And we also had an Arts Merit Scholar. And the Arts Merit Scholar program here at Bucknell is a scholarship program for incoming students that demonstrate extraordinary talent in the fields of art and design, art history, creative writing, dance, film and media studies, music, or theater. And then we structured the program to have across an entire semester to have weekly prompts. So we had 10 weekly prompts over the course of one fall semester. And we're going to show you a lot of the prompts. You won't get all of them throughout the presentation today, but we will show you majority of the prompts through today's presentation. And we focused a lot of the prompts on various topics like building relationships on campus, the challenges that they face, their campus involvement and engagement. And so I'm going to let Rebecca take it away. To start, we're going to look specifically at one student's ePortfolio. So she's given us permission to share her ePortfolio more broadly. So Rebecca's going to take it away from here and start to walk you through a little bit more of what these prompts were and hopefully let you see some of Kim's portfolio.
Thank you, Christa. So we do have a QR code, and I think Krista's working on dropping a link into the chat. Right, so Christa mentioned we did have 7 students who worked through across an entire semester on their portfolio. A lot of the students, and you'll see as you see a lot of the prompts, that a lot of these prompts and a lot of what the students wrote about was really personal. So a lot of students actually chose to keep their ePortfolio private and just shared it with us as like the leaders of the cohort. But Kim dedicated a lot of effort, and she created a really fantastic portfolio, and she chose to share her portfolio publicly and has also allowed us to share it with others. So throughout the presentation, we're going to show some quotes from her responses to some of the prompts, but she wrote a lot in for all of her responses. So if you would like to see more of it, you can look at her portfolio. And I was going to see if I can pull it up without making things too crazy. Let me see. If it doesn't work, I will give up.
Yeah, I did drop the link in the chat for anyone that will put up as a split screen.
Can we see it if I drop that window over there? Okay. Yeah, so right, this is Kim's portfolio. Since you all have the link, you can go through it. And like I mentioned, we're going to kind of just take some little snippets of her portfolio. We kind of left it to the students and how they wanted to organize their portfolio, but she did choose to organize hers with the 4 pillars kind of as the main topics here: needs, belongings, resources, and growth. Right, and then we had multiple kind of entries and prompts for several of these. And then the last one is kind of her reflection on the entire process. So maybe we can just see a few of, her very verbose reflections and artifacts that she's included throughout here. To our presentation. So we're going to go through each of the 4 Thrive pillars again and kind of explain them a little bit more and show you one of the prompts that we ask about them, and also show you a student quote. So the next 4 slides are kind of formatted in the same way. So the first pillar is needs. And this pillar includes basic needs like shelter, clothing, food, sleep, as well as physical and mental health. So the prompt that we're showing here is about mental health, particularly stress, and the way that students respond to it. So you can see in Kim's response, she discusses an unhelpful pattern of seeking distraction and procrastination when she gets stressed. So our next, we're going to show a reflection and a response about belonging. In the Thrive framework, This pillar is about feeling a sense of belonging, and that covers three different aspects, right? Feeling connected to Bucknell, kind of the institution, through spaces, traditions, and events that happen here, right? The second aspect is finding true friendships with your peers. And lastly, having at least one close, trusted adult mentor. So this prompt about belonging asks students about the first person they connected with on campus. And Kim is a presidential fellow and identifies the faculty mentor that she was paired with for undergraduate research. Presidential Fellows is a 4-year program, so students in their first year get paired with a faculty mentor that they'll do research with and are paired with them on the same project through over the 4 years that they're here. So she's talking about kind of when she first arrived on campus and this mentor, right, being providing some reassurance to her and demonstrating faith in her, right, which was helpful to her as a first generation student. So the next pillar asks if students are aware of and using resources. So the Thrive framework, states that resources only matter if students can find them and if they're perceived to be helpful. So this prompt asks the students about a challenge they face and particularly the resources available to address it. Kim's response discusses how she used resources from the Career Center to create a cover letter and used a resume review appointment to get a campus job in one of our university maker spaces. So this is kind of an interesting use of the resource, right? And that she's getting a job on campus right before she even leaves. So the last of our 4 pillars is growth, right? This pillar is achieved when students regularly see signs that they are growing in many ways. So we've encompassed all kinds of growth in there, such as intellectual growth, growth emotionally, growing in kind of your purpose and your identity. So we mentioned this prompt actually that we're showing here in our Designing Effective Prompts workshops yesterday, as it was a favorite prompt for both us and for the students. And so this is the prompt that asks students to connect. And then this one, because we were doing the Thrive pillars, they were asked to connect their growth to a song. And so I was inspired kind of to create a prompt like this because I had come back from a conference presentation and somebody used this type of question where they asked students to relate to a song as part of a student interview protocol. And they got really interesting results, and I thought that was a great idea. So while we aren't sharing all our students' responses, we are sharing all of their songs that they connected to. So they are all in a YouTube playlist. And we created this for our cohort, and we played them during our last cohort meeting. So I think you've got a couple ways to access it if you want to check it out at some point. This QR code, I believe Christa just dropped it into the chat. So I'll give you a moment to make sure you can read all of Kim's response here. All right, so students did 10 reflections across the semester, so about one a week or so after we got started in the 14-week semester. So they reflected on each Thrive pillar more than once. So here on the slide, we show a couple more prompts that the cohort responded to. Right, 2 of these prompts connected with growth, and they were part of one reflection assignment. The 2 kind of more on the left side. And you'll see in the one, right, we encourage students to be creative in expressing their reflections, right? A lot of times the majority of their reflection would kind of just be in a written prompt response, but especially on the one kind of the top left here, we really encourage them to think about kind of different ways that they could respond to that prompt. And then the prompt on the right is actually the last prompt we did in the semester, and we'll kind of return to this later in the presentation. But we asked students to complete a final reflection on the 4 pillars and identify where they thought they were thriving and which areas might need further effort. So one of the goals of this cohort, right, was to show how ePortfolios can identify students' authentic experience and also identify areas of concern that can help improve student success. So next, Christa is going to discuss some of the barriers that were brought up as students reflected on these 4 Thrive pillars.
Thanks, Rebecca. After reviewing all of the student portfolios, we were able to identify 3 main themes for the barriers. Those were mental health resources, sense of belonging and inclusivity, and as well as the awareness and accessibility of campus resources. Mental health was by far one of the more critical concerns for the students. It came up many times throughout their reflections, with many of them reporting stress, anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome, feelings of isolation. A lot of the reflections also touched upon struggles with time management, overcommitting to things, which affected both their academic success as well as their personal well-being. But on a positive note, the Counseling Center was frequently praised for being a valuable resource to the students, but some students did encounter some barriers with the Counseling Center. Primarily, one student mentioned having a really discouraging initial experience with the staff there, as well as another one indicating that they were unaware that the therapy options there are free. So that kind of leads into one of the other themes that we'll talk about. The next one was sense of belonging and inclusivity. So what we found throughout some of the reflections was that the students face a lot of challenge here, particularly early on during their career at Bucknell. And our transfer student from the community college particularly had mentioned that it was kind of hard to transition into Bucknell. And so a lot of them mentioned that they felt like it was hard to fit into campus culture. So there were feelings of isolation noted, that those were primarily in that first year time frame in their Bucknell career. And they discussed having to work to build those social connections on campus. The transfer student in particular had described feeling like an afterthought, which was pretty heartbreaking to read. But that obviously emphasizes the need for Bucknell to develop stronger transition support for this particular student population. But finally, the students also mentioned that there was a lack of culturally diverse spaces and dining options on campus. Obviously, having more of that would help our students of different backgrounds feel more at home here on campus if we were able to provide a little bit more culturally diverse experiences. And then the final theme was that challenge of resource accessibility and awareness. Many of the students struggled to find the support they needed, or they had difficulty utilizing resources due to like scheduling conflicts. So going back to some of those time management issues. Financial concerns were particularly a limitation on B-swipes, could make it difficult for students to access essential resources. So the B-swipe program that we learned about through this reflection allows students in need of food assistance to request additional meal swipes to get into the cafeteria. But the swipes are actually only provided to students based on their financial aid. And so one of the students mentioned that that was a challenge. So the assumption to be made, maybe they did not get the swipes because they didn't demonstrate enough need. But one thing to note that I don't believe was mentioned in that reflection is that Bucknell does have a free food pantry for students, which again could go to lack of awareness that this resource does exist on campus to help students when those B swipes maybe aren't able to be awarded.
Hey, so while part of the purpose of our cohort was to understand, where students were struggling with thriving and what barriers existed, uh, our students also highlighted existing campus support that help, right, all students thrive. So we found that most of these supports that students mentioned are people-centered. So this slide focuses on faculty and staff mentorship and support, while the next will cover peer and student groups. So students repeatedly identified programs that pair them with a faculty mentor, specifically the Gen First program, which is exclusively for first generation students, and pairs a first generation student with a faculty or staff member who is also first generation, and then the Presidential Fellows program, which we briefly mentioned in the belonging slide. So this quote for Kim's portfolio shows again that these mentors provide important support that extends well beyond just academic topics. So while some students did identify, right, belonging and kind of finding their people as barriers, a lot of the students, right, did eventually find student groups that really helped them to have a sense of belonging and support them. So there's a variety of different types of student groups on campus, but a few that this cohort mentioned were LACOS, which is a kind of cultural group for students that are part of the Latinx and Hispanic community. Engineering Success Alliance, which is a support group for engineering students, and the community college, a program for students that transfer into Bucknell. So at the end of the semester, right, we asked students to reflect and report on the progress towards each of the 4 Thrive pillars. Right. Ultimately, these results and the quote provided here show that thriving is a complex process. Students are able to meet some pillars more easily, while others might require more effort. So we compiled the results from the cohort, and we found that growth was consistently the pillar that students felt that they're meeting most effectively. We do think that kind of makes sense, considering these are college students, and right, this is a developmental stage where they're focused on their education and they're experiencing, right, a lot of changes and differences and growth, right, and that's a big part of what they're doing here and focused on. We also think, right, probably like this exercise of doing the ePortfolio, they were purposely identifying and reflecting and communicating their growth. So that might have helped them, really to see and articulate it and feel like that they were meeting this pillar. Students were more split on kind of the 2 pillars shown in the middle, belonging and resources, right? About an equal number of students said, yeah, we're meeting this pillar with ease, compared with an equal amount said, well, yeah, that's one of the pillars that needs a little bit more work. And then needs was commonly identified by our students as needing or requiring a little bit more effort. Right. So we are coming about to the end of our time, but I hope we can take maybe a couple minutes to discuss some of this. We want to thank you for attending our presentation and allowing us to share our experience with this pilot ePortfolio cohort. Our students at Bucknell typically encounter ePortfolios through coursework, or they kind of do them individually, perhaps for professional development, or to use them professionally. So this cohort model was a new learning experience for us. But we think that this work really shows how ePortfolios can be used as tools to learn more about the authentic student experience, which can be used to enhance our student success. So with that, I'd love to open up the floor for conversation to hear about your ePortfolio experiences that might relate to our work and or address any questions you would have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So much to unpack, and I also want to acknowledge comments, suggestions, resources in the chat as well. I think we have time for a couple of questions. So would anybody like to jump in?
So this is a very nosy question. How much was the stipends for the students?
$200.
Okay.
Yep, $200 once they had to complete the entire ePortfolio and submit it to us by a certain deadline.
Do you feel that that motivated them differently than if there was no compensation?
I mean, it may have, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. But we were concerned we wouldn't get anyone if we didn't have some sort of incentive to join the program. And so we thought that, like, while it's a decent stipend, it's not like a huge amount. So we were pretty happy, and we gave them, because it was like a whole semester long. I think that, you know, while it maybe influenced some of them, especially, I think there was one or two at the end that you could tell they were trying to play catch up on getting some of their reflections in by the deadline. A lot of them, I mean, they would have a whole week to write that reflection. And then I think one of the last weeks, our assignment was personalize it, make it your own, change the background, you know, and things like that.
I see Sonja has a question, and also Megan posted a question in the chat. So I can go to Sonja.
Well, I really have a comment based on this one of the students' reflections where they say the faculty repeatedly demonstrated more faith in me than I would have placed in myself. And I just think that is so powerful and speaks to a need that the students have, particularly first generation students. And in a culture where in the institution, it's all about how do we find the cheating? Where do we keep the cheating from? That's not communicating belief in the student's ability. And so I just think it's just keeps standing out so strong to me how powerful that is and how important that is, and that it popped up there. I'm just like, I just wanted to call that out.
Thank you so much. And Christa, Rebecca, would you be willing to share your activity or activities? I want to follow up on Megan's question.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify, do you mean the prompts? I mean, because mainly what we did were the ePortfolios, but we did have some meetings where we did some additional activities kind of as a group. So
no, I was largely interested in your prompts. I was certainly taking screenshots, but I was just hoping I could also see the way you're framing them to students, since you did, I think you said 10 over the semester. So, and I imagine that could be overwhelming if you saw it all up front. Just thinking about your timing, your scaffolding, and those prompts, because they were lovely.
We do have, and Rebecca, if you're okay with me sharing it, a Google Doc that has all the prompts 1 through 10. It looks like 11 was the personalization assignment, but are you okay with me sharing that, Rebecca?
yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Wonderful. I owe you all some hot chocolate or something sometime.
Thank you so very much. So we're going to include that and all the resources in our follow-up. I'm mindful of the time, and I want to thank Christa and Rebecca for sharing their time and their wonderful work